I was working at a travel agency in Paris when an American tourist demanded we move the Eiffel Tower closer to his hotel. He said he paid $4,000 for the trip, so landmark relocation should be included. When I explained that wasn't possible, he insisted France clearly had poor urban planning and offered to send us a PDF of his hometown's zoning laws. He said Americans invented city grids, so we obviously needed guidance. He left a one-star review saying Paris refuses to accommodate paying customers. I document this kind of global logic full-time, so you don't have to experience it firsthand. Most channels share opinions. I archive behavior. If that distinction matters to you, you already belong here. I was working as a tour guide in Rome when an American dad asked why Italy doesn't just rebuild the Colosseum to fix all the broken parts. He said in America, they'd never let a stadium get that run down. When I explained it was 2,000 years old and historically preserved, he suggested we at least add a retractable roof and cup holders. He pulled up his contractor cousin's number and offered to get us a quote for renovations. He said the Romans clearly needed American construction expertise. His son asked if they had hot dogs at gladiator fights. I was working at a hostel in Amsterdam when an American woman complained that everyone speaking Dutch was making her feel excluded. She demanded the entire country switch to English during her 2-week stay. When I explained Dutch was their native language, she said she read online that Europe is basically America's history museum, so we should cater to tourists. She printed out a petition for mandatory English-only zones within 10 feet of Americans. She called speaking Dutch near her linguistic bullying. She reported us to the American embassy for creating a hostile environment. I was working at a restaurant in Tokyo when an American man sent back his ramen because the noodles were too authentic. He said real ramen should taste like the cup noodles he grew up with. When the chef refused to add artificial chicken flavor powder, he accused us of serving hipster food. He brought out a packet of instant ramen seasoning from his fanny pack and offered to teach our chef proper technique. He said Japan had clearly lost touch with traditional ramen making. He left saying he'd stick to Benihana back home where they understand Japanese culture. I was working at a hostel in Thailand when an American college student insisted we install air conditioning in the outdoor market across the street. He said the heat was ruining his cultural experience. When I explained we don't control public spaces, he suggested Thailand apply for a climate control grant from America. He'd brought a handheld thermometer and recorded readings every hour as evidence. He claimed the heat was geographically discriminatory against people from temperate climates. He started a GoFundMe to air-condition Southeast Asia. He raised $67. Most people scroll past this kind of field research. The ones who subscribe? They're collecting cross-cultural case studies in real time. It's not commentary. It's quiet anthropology disguised as comedy. I was working as a museum guide in Egypt when an American tourist said the pyramids would look better painted white, like the Lincoln Memorial. He claimed the beige color scheme lacked patriotic energy. When I explained their ancient wonders, he said ancient doesn't mean we can't improve them. He suggested adding American flags at the peak to really make them pop in photos. He'd brought paint swatches to show us what he meant. He said Egypt needed American aesthetic guidance to compete with Vegas. His wife agreed the Sphinx could use googly eyes to seem more welcoming. Dre was working at a cafe in Barcelona when an American woman demanded we stop our siesta tradition because it interfered with her shopping schedule. She said in America, businesses stay open because they respect customer time. When I explained siesta is cultural, she accused Spain of being lazy and socialist. She started filming us with her phone, narrating about how Europeans don't understand capitalism. She offered to conduct a seminar on American work ethic for 20 euros per person. She called our culture economically inefficient. She tried to report Spain to the Better Business Bureau. I was working at a ski resort in Switzerland when an American dad complained the Alps were too steep and dangerous. He demanded Switzerland flatten some mountains to accommodate beginner skiers like his family. When I suggested they try easier slopes, he said he paid for Swiss Alps, not Swiss hills. He'd brought a leveling app on his phone and showed me the concerning gradients. He suggested we look into American mountain management techniques. He said Colorado had figured out how to make mountains user-friendly. He asked for a refund based on false advertising of accessible peaks. I was working at a pub in Dublin when an American man insisted Irish people were doing St. Patrick's Day wrong. He said real celebrations require green beer, plastic leprechauns, and dropkick Murphys. When our bartender explained Irish traditions differ, he accused us of cultural appropriation of our own holiday. He'd brought decorations from Party City to show us proper St. Patrick's Day aesthetics. He said Boston invented the holiday, and Ireland just copied it badly. He demanded we serve corned beef despite it not being Irish. He left saying we clearly didn't understand Irish heritage. I was working as a guide in Iceland when an American tourist asked why Iceland doesn't just heat the whole country with their geothermal energy. She said the cold was unnecessarily uncomfortable. When I explained we can't control outdoor temperatures, she suggested we weren't maximizing our resources. She'd drawn up plans for a nationwide heating dome on a napkin. She said America would have figured this out already. She offered to connect us with engineers who worked on mall climate control. She called Iceland's approach to natural resources primitive. She asked if we'd considered moving the country closer to the equator. I was working at a hotel in Morocco when an American couple demanded we change the call to prayer timing because it woke them at 5 a.m. They said their sleep schedule was more important than local religious practices. When I explained this was central to Islamic culture, they suggested Morocco consider a democratic vote on prayer times. They'd brought a sleep tracking app showing disrupted REM cycles as evidence. They said in America, noise ordinances protect hotel guests. They offered to introduce us to their homeowners association for guidance. They threatened to leave a review about religious noise. Pollution. I was working at a train station in Germany when an American man complained that trains running exactly on schedule was stressful and unrealistic. He said the punctuality gave him performance anxiety. When I explained Germans value precision, he said it was creating an oppressive environment. He insisted we introduce a 15-minute buffer like American trains have. He'd timed 17 trains and found 0 delays, which he called statistically suspicious. He said this level of efficiency was unnatural. He demanded we purposely delay some trains so tourists could relax. He called German punctuality a form of temporal bullying. I was working at a market in India when an American woman insisted we install self-checkout machines to modernize the shopping experience. She said haggling was awkward and inefficient. When vendors explained negotiation is traditional, she accused them of not embracing progress. She'd brought printouts about retail automation from Target's website. She offered to show them how American scanning technology works. She said India needed to catch up to modern commerce. She tried to pay with Apple Pay and got upset when it didn't work. She left saying cash-based economies were archaic. I was working at a beach in Australia when an American dad demanded we remove all the jellyfish from the ocean during his vacation. He'd paid for a beach experience, and jellyfish weren't part of it. When I explained marine life isn't controllable, he suggested we needed better ocean management. He said Florida beaches don't have this problem because they maintain their waters properly. He'd brought his own net and started capturing jellyfish as a demonstration. He offered to teach Australians proper beach maintenance. He accused us of not caring about tourist safety. His solution was to drain and refill the ocean. I was working at a cafe in Sweden when an American woman complained that Swedish people being too polite was making her uncomfortable. She said she needed conflict to feel like authentic human interaction. When I explained politeness is cultural, she accused Swedes of being passive-aggressive through kindness. She'd kept a log of every pleasant interaction as proof. She demanded we introduce American-style customer service where people are more confrontational. She said healthy societies need more arguing. She offered to conduct rudeness training for 50 kroner per hour. She called Swedish niceness emotionally manipulative. I was working at a vineyard in France when an American man insisted French wine would taste better if they added ice cubes. He said room temperature wine was a pretentious European thing. When the sommelier refused, he accused France of gatekeeping their own product. He'd brought a cooler of ice and offered to improve everyone's glasses. He said American wine culture had perfected the beverage. He started a TikTok about how France doesn't understand wine anymore. He claimed Napa Valley had surpassed French technique decades ago. He asked why France won't accept constructive criticism from tourists. I was working at a history museum in Poland when an American teenager said they should replace all the sad Holocaust exhibits with something more uplifting. She said museums should focus on positive vibes. When I explained historical importance, she suggested we at least add inspirational quotes over the photos. She'd brought a ring light to take selfies before reading any plaques. She said American museums know how to make history fun. She complained the exhibits were depressing her Instagram aesthetic. She asked if we had a gift shop with happier merchandise. She wanted history without the uncomfortable parts. I was working at a hotel in Greece when an American couple demanded the ruins outside their window be removed because they blocked the sunset view. They said ancient rocks weren't worth premium room rates. When I explained these were archaeologically significant, they suggested Greece clearly didn't understand hospitality priorities. They'd measured the shadow the Parthenon cast on their balcony at golden hour. They said in America, they'd never let old buildings interfere with paying guests. They offered to personally dismantle the ruins if we provided tools. They called preservation of ancient sites anti-tourism. They asked for a manager to discuss relocating antiquities. I was working at a restaurant in Vietnam when an American man insisted pho would be better with hamburger meat instead of traditional beef cuts. He said ground beef was more efficient. When the chef declined, he accused Vietnam of being stuck in outdated cooking methods. He'd brought his own pound of ground chuck from a military base commissary. He offered to teach them American efficiency in the kitchen. He said PIO was basically Vietnamese hamburger soup anyway. He tried to add ketchup to his bowl. He left saying Vietnam lost the war and clearly lost culinary innovation too. I was working at a castle tour in Scotland when an American woman demanded they install elevators because stairs were discriminatory. She was perfectly able-bodied but said climbing was inconvenient. When I explained medieval architecture limitations, she accused Scotland of not being ADA compliant. She'd brought a measuring tape and documented every step's height. She said American castles all have elevators and accessibility ramps. When I explained those are theme parks, not real castles, she insisted Disney's version was more authentic. She threatened to sue Scotland for architectural negligence. She asked why they built castles wrong in the first place. I was working at a hostel in Portugal when an American student complained that Portuguese sounded too much like Spanish, and it was confusing him. He demanded Portugal switch to English or pick a more distinct language. When I explained Portuguese predates his country, he said that wasn't his fault. He'd made flashcards trying to learn Portuguese but got frustrated. He suggested Portugal just adopt Spanish officially since they're neighbors. He said linguistic diversity was unnecessarily complicated for tourists. He offered to teach everyone English if Portugal paid for his extended stay. He called having your own language when a similar one exists redundant. I was working at a tour company in New Zealand when an American family complained the country was too small and asked if we could combine it with Australia. They said having two island nations so close together was inefficient. When I explained sovereignty, they suggested a merger would simplify their vacation planning. They'd brought a map where they'd drawn a line connecting both countries. They said America has Hawaii, so they understand island management. They offered to mediate negotiations between the governments. They asked why New Zealand couldn't just be Australia's smaller, friendlier state. They said their cruise itinerary would make more sense if we merged. I was working at a cafe in Norway when an American man demanded we explain why Norway doesn't just move south, where it's warmer. He said the cold was a design flaw. When I explained countries can't relocate, he accused me of lacking vision. He'd researched continental drift and insisted we could speed it up. He said if Norway marketed itself better, they could attract the right tectonic activity. He offered to start a Kickstarter for geographic repositioning. He said Americans had moved entire mountains for highways, so this was possible. He called Norway's commitment to cold weather stubborn. His solution involved very large boats pushing the country toward the Mediterranean. If this level of international logic gives you equal parts laughter and existential concern, you'll want to stay close. I decode these collisions weekly. Subscribe and consider it ongoing proof that satire writes itself.